Okay, how's the coffee? That's the real question. Not good. This is canned cold brew. This isn't even like the good stuff. I don't know, it's not good. Hi, welcome to Dev Brew. This is where indie developers send their games to get feedback on their game design. So before we begin, let's just get real really quick. Sometimes it can feel really bad when someone talks a lot of shit about your game. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm hoping that this video will help a lot of game developers look at their creations more critically. And so thank you, John, for putting Curse of Zixx in a vulnerable spot. Before we begin, I want to list out some of the things that I think Curse of Zixx is trying to achieve. First, I believe the game is trying to be both interesting and playable. Second, I think it's trying to form an emotional connection with the player, at least at the beginning. Let's start with emotional connection. In the very beginning of the game, a cinematic plays to inform us of the context to our gameplay. We're told that an army attacks the kingdom, no one sees it coming. And then we see Ray, as the king hands him a crystal, telling him he knows he can take down Zixx. One thing that keeps the emotional connection at bay is trying to figure out who I should care about. Here, I realize I should probably be feeling bad for Ray, but I don't know who he is. And the only person I know at this point is the king, and that's because the story began from his perspective. And now that I'm connected with the king, that kind of screws up the context for the rest of the story. The king is handing over a crystal, but because I'm connected with him, I'm thinking, well, I've never seen that crystal before. When he says, "You're talented, I know you can handle Zixx," I don't know who Zixx is. I don't know why the king is saying this stuff. All of this confusion could probably be alleviated if I was connected with Ray rather than the king. And I think the way to do this would be to start the story off from Ray's perspective. That way I don't need to know who Zixx is, I don't need to know what the crystal is, it's something that I learn along with Ray at the same time. Later on in the intro of the game, the player comes to this part, which feels like an inspiration from Mega Man X. As Ray faces a threat, someone else comes in to save him. This is Anzuin, and it's the first time we're introduced to him. It's similar to this scene in Mega Man X, where we're playing as Mega Man, and after getting captured by an enemy, we're saved by Zero, which achieves an emotional connection because the player is invested in this battle. But this isn't by default, this is built up through clever design. The reason why the player is invested in this battle is because the player expects to be able to beat this enemy, but they can't. This creates a dissonance which puts the player at unease until they're saved by someone. Therefore, they end up caring about this Zero guy. In here, the only context that we have is one previous battle, which has its own problems, but we'll come back to that. So when we come to this battle, Anzuin's presence is more surprising than anything else. We never felt like we were in trouble, therefore we didn't really feel saved, we felt indifferent. So because we're building on top of that emotion of indifference, unfortunately everything that comes afterwards feels superficial. Anzuin says he'll stay and tells Ray to go, with which Ray responds, "Alright," which I feel like Ray should probably be more concerned about this since Anzuin seems to be sacrificing himself. Ray then continues to the right of the screen, which is important, remember that. Then suddenly the camera tracks left and we see some big dude bust through the wall and captures Anzuin, and this scene plays out. And then this guy says, "You're next, let's not make it hard." Ray says, "I'll come back." Ray then lifts his crystal, which I'm still unsure of what that is, but he runs to the right and then jumps into this dramatic slow motion sequence. At this point, I feel like I was supposed to be crushed by Anzuin's death, or at least felt sympathy for Ray, but I don't know who Anzuin was, and I don't even know what he meant to Ray. So when he died, it was more of a shock than any kind of emotional punch. And throughout my gameplay, I never actually thought about Anzuin again, which is a real bummer because that could have made for some really good motivation. Imagine if in Mega Man, if Zero died after saving you. That would feel really motivating. You would feel vengeful because you're emotionally connected to him. When Ray lifts his hand and the crystal glows, I don't really know what he's doing, and I don't know why it's glowing. And I'd be fine with not knowing these things, but if I'm gonna be connected with Ray, then I need to know why he's doing the things he's doing, and when he just does stuff on his own, it kinda disconnects me from him. Then there's this sequence. The slow motion here implies that the action is meant to be dramatic, but I'm unsure as to why it's supposed to be dramatic. As far as I know, he was already going to the right of the screen, remember? Ray then continues to the right of the screen, which is important, remember that. When Anzuin appeared and started to take on the guards by himself, he said go, and Ray started to go to the right of the screen, so where was he going? Was he gonna jump? I was never aware that the jump was there, so it was never in my mind that this was ever a dangerous situation. So when he jumps, it doesn't feel like it's dangerous, it just feels like he's just doing something. I believe what's happening here is that Ray is doing a last resort kind of choice. He's throwing caution to the wind, and through bravery and courage, he is going to just jump and try to make it out alive. But again, because I never knew this jump was there, and I never knew it was dangerous, it doesn't give me any feeling. I don't feel anything here. And to top it off, this fish that comes out of the water just adds more to the confusion, and it starts to make the scene feel like it's taking itself too seriously. The fish is a threat, but I didn't know it was a threat. I didn't know it was there to begin with, so when it just pops up out of the screen, it just looks like something's happening. Should I be afraid? I'm not sure. I think one of the best ways to get a player involved in the emotion is to make them do the things that you want them to feel. It is an interactive medium, after all. One of the things that could be interesting here is what if the player was the one who had to make that jump because they were in trouble? They would suddenly understand the threats, and they would understand there was a dangerous situation, but they're trying to make the most of the situation. It would take some hard design in order to create like a proper way to lead the player over there, but it goes to show I think there is some room for improvement in connecting the emotion there. Now let's look at how Curse of Zixx tries to achieve playability. First, we'll look at what the game is trying to do with its introduction. The first time you're given control, you're able to walk a little bit until you get to a hill, and a prompt pops up, showing you how to dash. The prompt includes everything you need to know in order to dash, but the way it's presented leaves much to be desired. You gotta remember that when someone begins your game, they have zero context, unless they watched a trailer or something. But they don't know if the game is gonna have lives or energy or health or whatever it is. They don't know how it's gonna work because they're coming in with no context. So in the case of this prompt, the player isn't expecting to learn everything in one go. There's too much information for us all at once. We should be introduced bit by bit. That's not to say that your game can't have this kind of information. It can. It's just typically whenever a player comes over to play a platformer, they feel like they already know how to play it. This might catch them off guard. The prompt also has extraneous information that I just don't need to know. If I dash upward or sideways, I automatically understand it's used for getting around obstacles. I don't need to be told that in the text. If I see the energy meter is used after I dash, I don't really need to be told that the energy meter is going to be used. It's something I can see. And there's no reason why I need to be told that the meter will refill after 1.5 seconds. I won't be counting 1.5 seconds after I use the dash. That's something I'll be able to see as it animates. Of course, all this works much better if you have good animations or strong sound effects, because at the moment, it's hard to keep my eyes in the center of the screen and tell when my energy meter is being used. The prompt also mentions that layer 1 will fill up. I don't know what layer 1 means. Again, this is a context thing. I'm sure eventually players can figure out what layer 1 means. I mean, I did, but it's a mental work thing, and that creates boredom. Even in the game Halo, there's never really a need to explain the 2 layers that make up your health. It's all done through visuals and sound effects. I think all you need to do is show the player what the energy bar looks like, and that's it. Then they'll put 2 and 2 together and figure out how the energy bar works as they play the game. The second part of the introduction introduces the player to combat through another prompt. Instead of teaching 2 moves, this prompt is teaching only 1 move. However, the prompt itself kinda looks similar to the previous one. There's this guideline in graphic design known as the proximity principle, and you can see the game using it here. You can tell that these labels underneath the pictures are related because of the color of the background and the color of the font, although it's a little broken on the left side. And because this prompt looks generally the same as the other prompt, it's confusing that it's teaching something very different. And unfortunately, that's where this whole thing kind of falls apart. Through confusing use of many different little aspects, the prompt ends up being more confusing than anything. But beyond that, it's expectations that start to make the game feel a little bit unfair. After reading the prompt and going to experiment with your move for the first time, you're not given a chance. Half a second after you close the prompt, literally 30 frames after closing it, you're attacked by all 3 enemies at once. And while you're trying to get away and practice your move you just learned, the move has a 30-second cooldown period, meaning you have to spend most of your time evading the enemies, waiting for your meter to refill. And yes, the prompt does mention that you can attack enemies to refill the meter faster, although it doesn't actually explain how to attack. But it's very difficult to hit the enemy when you have no telegraphing, meaning they don't let the player know when they're about to attack. And when they do attack, their attack seems to have precedence over the player's, meaning if the player tries to attack at the same time, the enemy wins. All of this together makes it very difficult to try to learn what I'm supposed to do. This isn't game breaking, but it leads to a lot of frustration because this is still the introduction of the level, and while I'm trying to learn, I end up getting punished to hell. Even Dark Souls lets the player learn how to fight first. I died 9 times here. I got 3 game overs on the intro level. That will inevitably make players want to give up. I would suggest reading this article on GD Keys about enemy design. It's really good, and I think it would help with all of the enemies in this whole game. Now I want to talk about the realm selection screen. This is a very small section, but it needs to be addressed. When you enter this area, there's 2 door-like shapes. You approach one, and it triggers a prompt implying that you should press B. So you do, and this prompt comes up, which says, once you get inside a realm, you won't be able to get out until you finish all levels. And you have one option, continue. I don't know if this was on purpose, but there's no cancel button. Like, what if I change my mind after reading your scary prompt? Seriously though, putting this prompt in here means that you want to inform the player that their choice will be permanent, and I think that's a good thing to tell the player. But why tell them if they can't change their choice? I'd almost rather have no prompt and just deal with the choice that I made. The denial of choice in a video game means something. When you deny the player choice after telling them the consequences, that does something to the player's mind. This almost feels like a horror game at this point. Imagine if we changed the elements around, but kept the same choice. Say you walk up to an NPC, and the prompt comes up and says, press B. So you do, and it says, once you kill the shopkeeper, he won't be able to respawn again. And all you can do is press continue. That is the implication of designing choices in games. They can feel very powerful, but they have to be designed first. So understand what your choices feel like before you create them. Now, let's move on to the first level. First, I gotta give props where props are due. The water levels and the fire levels all have their own aesthetic, which is followed not only in color, but with the music and the enemies and even the type of gameplay. So props. Now, back to harsh criticism. The water level begins with a nice contrast of dark cave, with super... Okay, so the foreground elements are the same color as the hazards, but also in the very beginning, there's a hidden hazard. Before I even know how the game is played, I fall onto spikes. The first time I played this part, I thought this was the thing that killed me, and I started avoiding those for the rest of the game, but turns out those are just foreground elements. It's actually these that killed me. It should just go without saying that tricking your players in the beginning of a game is not a good way to increase their confidence, unless you're intentionally trying to make an unfair game, like I want to be the guy. But that game is all about being unfair, and it sets expectations up front and is consistent throughout, meaning the players expect the whole game to be unfair and sees it as a challenge. It's more of a mind game than a skill. But Curse of Zixx is not a mind game, it's an action platformer, so it doesn't need mind tricks like these. To make it interesting, it needs to be a game where platforming and fighting is fun to do. I showed this game to a game designer called Paperweight Games, and he had this to say about the environment.
Another point on Curse of Zixx is that the level decorations are hard to tell apart from the surfaces, making it difficult for the player to confidently navigate or build trust in the visual information the game is providing. If your game is going to be visually abstract or confusing, then this should be an intentional part of the design, since it might otherwise disrupt other aspects of the gameplay.
Okay, remember when I said the first time I played this part, I thought this was the thing that killed me? I used that term killed when the spikes didn't actually kill me. Look at this part. The reason why the word killed was in my mind was because whenever I hit spikes in this game, it sent me back to the checkpoint, which is typically something that happens when you die in video games. But for some reason in here, you don't get sent back to checkpoints anytime you get hit. It's just when you hit spikes. So why is that? What's so special about spikes that they send you all the way back to a checkpoint? This kind of gameplay should be intentional. There should be a reason for this to happen. In some games, it makes sense to restart the player every single time they get hurt because the challenge is to get through the challenge in one try. But in this game, we're typically exploring. We're not trying to get through everything in one try. Sometimes there's a path that you want to explore, but you decide against it because you're afraid you're gonna get hurt and it's not worth the error to have to redo this entire section. It's also just kind of weird to respawn the same way when you die. It makes dying feel really strange. Speaking of dying, I'm unsure as to why there's even lives at all in this game. Lives are used for retrying. You're given the player a certain amount of times that they're able to retry a certain challenge. But since all the levels are pretty small, it doesn't take me a whole lot of time to get back to where I was, even after I lose all my lives. Here, it took me less than 2 minutes to get back to where I was before I got a game over. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit hypocritical because I was just bitching about spikes, sending me back to checkpoints, but there's a difference. When I die, I'm expecting to restart the level. My health ran out, meaning I made a ton of errors, and now I'm punished for making all of those errors. On the other hand, when I hit spikes, I only made one error, to which I already am punished by my health lowering. Why then would I need to be further punished and sent all the way back to a checkpoint? Again, why are spikes so special? Now, if you really like this functionality, you could still have it in your game, but I would design it a little bit differently. You could make the spikes drain the player's health completely. That way the spikes feel way more dangerous. But if you did that, you'd have to limit the amount of spikes that there are so that they don't feel like they're hindering the overall experience. Personally, I would design the spikes like other platformers, where I would create some sort of invincibility frame to give the player a chance to correct their error. Although that would mean that you have to redesign all the levels. Or I would put context-sensitive checkpoints near the spikes so that the player doesn't have to redo their entire run, similar to how Hollow Knight handles their spikes. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about with Curse of Zixx is the mechanics. Let's first just talk about jumping. The jump in this game is fixed, meaning the player can't control the height of the jump. This isn't a bad thing, it just changes the way that you use platforms. You have to be focused on making your jumps count. But what's a little strange about that is that the rest of the mechanics are all about increasing your traversal. You can dash, you can double jump, and you can float using your fighting ability. So I find it a bit weird that you can't control the height of your jump. Another odd mechanic is the control of mid-air velocity, which is great. I like this kind of control. But what's strange about it is that your double jump stops your forward motion, meaning you can control your movement, but not while you're dashing upward. I want to be clear that no mechanic is inherently bad. You can make almost any mechanic feel really good if you design the game around it. I'm just pointing out what seems to be conflicting about these ones. I really enjoy the fighting ability in this game quite a lot. I find it really fun to have a floating, punching, and kicking attack. It makes for an interesting interaction. However, it doesn't feel like the levels are designed around that kind of moveset. Most of the hazards seem to be measured out specifically for dashing. And this is where we get to the overall point here. This game needs a lot of playtesting. You should have a lot of people play this game for free. and then collect as much information as you can. I mean, like how often they win, how often they lose, when they leave the game, when they're too upset by the game, how long it takes them to get to certain places, everything, and in as much detail as possible. Get all of that stuff and then redesign your game using that information to alleviate any incongruencies. Game design in its entirety is about making the game the way you want it to be. And if following guidelines and rules aren't doing it for you, if it's creating a game that you're not sure you like, then you need to figure out why. And playtesting is a good way to do that. So I hope everything that we've talked about here has been able to help whoever is watching this video. If you enjoyed this breakdown and you have a game that you want to see broken down, you can submit it using the link below the like button. Also, if you would benefit from a game design consultant, email me and we'll see what we can do. That's it for today. My name is Devon. This is Games Over Coffee, and I will see you later. Thank you for watching. I feel like that scene in Sherlock. Something you should know, Green Mask Games. This is bonus content, if you will. I wanted to tell you that I got locked. I got soft locks. I got a lot of soft locks in your game. The first soft lock that I had was in the water temple, or the water temple, in the water level here. My platform just kind of froze, and I couldn't get past it. Another soft lock that happened was when I was in this level with the little triangles, trying to rotate the triangles. These things wouldn't rotate, and so I couldn't do anything in the puzzle, so I was trapped here. Another soft lock that I had was in this really big triangle-looking room with a bunch of moving pieces. This block got stuck, and I couldn't figure out how to. I didn't know it was a moving platform, so it just got stuck there and it wouldn't move anymore. So I couldn't finish the level. And then in this one, I came over to the button, hit the button, and then came up and it got slammed into the wall, and I couldn't get out of the wall no matter how hard I tried. And then after I quit that level, I tried to get back to where I was, but I couldn't get past the door in this thing because because they weren't reset. So after I died, nothing reset. So now I'm locked out of my game file and I have to start a new game. There was also another time in this game that I was in the water and I could never get the prompt to get out of the water to come up. So I kept trying to swim up to the top and I just kept doing that over and over, and I would never get out of the water, so I had to stop the game. There's also no way to delete data from this game. I can't delete my save data. I had to delete the data from app data local low, which is way too deep for anyone to actually do. A piece of advice for marketing purposes: I went to the site, that you gave me for the link for the game, and when I clicked on the link to download the demo, it asked me if I wanted to pay for it, basically. But since this is a demo, I don't think I should be paying for it. A donate button, totally have a donate button, but pay for the demo, I wouldn't do that. The fire boss here has a 1-frame attack where he just kills you in 1 frame. There was a glitch where one of these little red cloud guys kept attacking me over and over and over, and I couldn't escape, and so I just had to sit there and wait for my health to go all the way down and die. Welcome to DevBrew. This is where, I keep looking at my script, this is where indie developers send their games, and no, my name is Devon. That's not how we do these. Welcome to DevBrew. This is where indie developers send their games and expect me to give them feedback for some reason, and was submitted to us by John.